Muchas gracias, Agustina. Y yo pensaba que este seminario está en inglés, pero estamos hablando en español.
Puede ser en cualquiera de los dos idiomas. Yo hice como un mix por estar en Argentina y después en
desde la India hablan español. Pues sería mejor que yo hablo en inglés porque ellos también pueden entenderme.
Perfecto.
Gracias, Agustina, para invitarme. Thank you, Agustina. Thank you, University of La Plata, for inviting me. I was commenting to Agustina that my understanding was that this whole program was in English, and she started in Spanish, and I don't think the Indian participants speak Spanish. I'm not sure, but that's what I feel. And of course, I had an earlier interaction with Dr. Rajdeep Pakaniti, and I know that he doesn't speak Spanish because he gave his courses in English. Very good morning to all the participants from Argentina, and a very good evening to all the participants in India for this special program being organized by the International Relations Department of University of La Plata. University of La Plata has had this Indian chair, they call it Cátedra de la India, in their university for a long time, and they have always had very good interaction with us and also with Indian institutions. I'm glad today they are organizing this program and getting three very important distinguished speakers from India, Ms. Sonia Surbi Gupta, Dr. Rajdeep Pakarnati, and Ms. Preeti Singh. Welcome to three of you to this program, and also to Jasbel Kaur, who is also going to speak in this on Indian diaspora in Argentina. Jasbel, welcome to you too. The relations between India and Argentina, as you know, are more than 70 years old. Of course, I'm talking about the independent India because the relationship between India and Argentina has been there for more than 150 years. Because if you look at the migration of Indians into Argentina, the first family of India came to Argentina sometime in 1870s in the northern province of Jujuy. And then, of course, these northern provinces of Argentina, be it Jujuy, Salta, and Tucumán, still have a small population of Indian origin. And they, of course, have a Gurdwara in Salta where Jasbel comes from. And from then on, we have had a relationship of friendship, of goodwill, and respect. And this has, of course, matured and enhanced during the last 130, 140 years. At present, India and Argentina enjoy a very close relationship. The partnership was enhanced to the level of strategic partnership in year 2019. That was last year when the former president of Argentina visited India. Since the new government has taken over, let me come to the present, what is happening between the two countries. The relationship has further strengthened since the new government in Argentina took over in December 2019, with President Alberto Fernandez taking over as the president. And as a special gesture, Prime Minister of India conveyed his congratulations on Twitter, to which the president-elect at that time, Mr. Alberto Fernandez, responded on Twitter. And I think that gesture went a long way because that showed India's keenness to partner with Argentina on various issues, and of course reciprocation by Argentina to collaborate with India. Then, of course, with the new government, I must say that before the new government settled down, they had to face the lockdown in March, which also happened in India, and several months went by without any physical activity. But of course, now we are having this program on digital platform, and the digital platform has provided another means, another avenue for us to collaborate. And this continued because in the month of May, soon after the lockdown was announced in both the countries, the two foreign ministers spoke to each other, and we had, following that, we had a joint working group on agriculture meeting. Then there was a foreign office consultation which took place after 6 years in the month of September, where the two deputy foreign ministers of both countries sat together and deliberated on all the bilateral issues. Very interestingly and very importantly, the Joint Trade Committee between India and Argentina, which had not met for almost 30 years since 1991, that also met in October, and last week only, and many of you are aware that last week on Friday, that is 6th of November, we hosted a think tank event that was co-hosted between RIS, which is a major policy a think tank in India, in New Delhi, and CPEC, which is a very renowned think tank in Argentina, which also hosted the T20 meeting when Argentina had the presidency of G20 in 2018. So this program, of course, was very successful. We had participation of several institutions from both the countries, India as well as Argentina. And the closing ceremony witnessed the participation of the Foreign Minister of Argentina, Mr. Felipe Sola, and the External Affairs Minister of India, Dr. Jaishankar. The think tank deliberated on various issues of bilateral concern, of bilateral importance, and also multilaterally how India and Argentina could cooperate to have a sort of a new role in the new world order, I would say. And then, of course, the two foreign ministers gave a visionary statement in which they outlined the areas where we should be focusing on. And I must say that these are broad range, starting from political relationship to economic and commercial relationship to cultural and people-to-people contact. We already have a huge encompassing relationship between the two countries, and I think the time has come to take it even further. I must say that the India-Argentina trade is doing rather well. The economic partnership has been further strengthened in the last few years, but particularly we have reached a new peak of more than $3 billion of bilateral trade in the last financial year of India, 2019-2020. And very importantly, that this trend has been continuing in this year in spite of the lockdown. The first 9 months of this year, 2020, show that the trade is going to go up further from the last year peak, which was the unprecedented peak. Besides the economic relationship, I think there's one point I must comment on, that is the huge goodwill for yoga, Ayurveda, and as well as the spirituality of India, which I think, if you look at Argentina, I would say it has the highest per capita practitioners of yoga and followers of Indian spirituality, which is unparalleled with any other countries. I have been to 50 odd countries myself, and I have served in several countries myself, and I've not seen this kind of a goodwill for and respect for Indian culture. So that is a very important bond, very special bond, which is not much talked about. And I'm glad that Ms. Gupta will be talking about intercultural dialogue in the global South. And of course, she's picking up a particular topic of translation of Saint poet Kabir's poems. But looking at overall relationship, I think India and Argentina are poised for a very strong, very close relationship in the present regimes of both the countries, and we are looking forward to working together to enhance it, not only at the government level, but also at the level of civil society, think tanks, and people to people. I think I will stop at this point of time, and I would like to once again convey my thanks to University of La Plata for inviting me to this program, and best wishes to all the 4 speakers who will be speaking after me in the next session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for being here and for being part of this table of India in the international context. Next, we are going to invite to a friend of the chair of India, Rajdeep. I don't want to pronounce but your surname.
Sí, me molestas un minutito, Agustina, está el profesor Consani también para decir unas palabras.
Ah, discúlpame, listo, buenísimo. Entonces vamos con Norberto y después
yo
seguimos con Rajdeep.
tranquila.
Muchísimas gracias.
Profesor Consani, ¿se encuentra ahí? No, parece que justo tuvo un inconveniente técnico.
Si te parece, entonces ese vamos con la presentación de Rajdip y después cuando se pueda conectar Norberto, seguimos.
Listo, perfecto. Yo lo presento. Bueno, ya dando, bueno, a partir de las palabras de su excelencia, el embajador de la India, damos inicio, digamos, a esta sesión sobre India en el Congreso de Relaciones Internacionales del IRI. Bueno, y voy a ceder la palabra a quien va a dar inicio a la mesa. Él es el doctor Rajdip Pakanati. Él es licenciado en Ciencias Políticas por la Universidad Kakatiya de la India. Tiene maestrías en Ciencias Políticas y Relaciones Internacionales de la Universidad, bueno, Jawaharlal Nehru, también de la India, y también de la Universidad de Delaware en Estados Unidos. Y es, actualmente se desempeña como profesor en la Jindal School of International Affairs y en la Jindal Global University de India. Bueno, y sus áreas de expertise son, bueno, relaciones internacionales, ciencias comparadas, derecho internacional y gobernanza global, con un interés actualmente focalizado en las relaciones de India y China. Bueno, doctor Rachid, le agradezco obviamente su presencia en el Congreso y le cedo la palabra. Muchas gracias.
Good morning, everyone. I had a few slides to share. Mr. Ezekiel, I would appreciate if either you can give me permission to run the slides by myself or share my screen, or if you
1 minute,
do have,
please.
Sure, thanks.
There we go. You shouldn't have a problem now.
Okay. Good morning once again, everyone. And I thank the comments by Ambassador His Excellency Dinesh Bhatia. I also would like to thank Agustina for inviting me to make a presentation at this Congress. And what I hope to do, considering that the audience here is predominantly from South America, Argentina, I will try to share a story in a way through a few maps and figures, and on the topic of India and its neighbors. When we try to make the point about India and its neighbors, what I want to say is I'll give an overview by highlighting the geographical, historical, and what I suggest is a democratic culture that in many ways defines South Asia. And I also suggest that India can be placed at the center of this region, and this centrality affects the politics of the neighboring countries too. So to run through these points, I'll use a few maps and other illustrations to make my argument. Here are a few representation, and I have utilized or referred to the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation and the countries in this particular region, and their respective flags, just to give a sense. But in the next slide, which I think is something that one could focus a lot, is on the geographical map of South Asian neighborhood. As you can see, India is at the center of it, and we are in many ways surrounded or with the various other countries of this region, from Afghanistan, which has been brought into the formal organization of SAARC later, but other countries include, of course, Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Maldives. And the reason I focus on this geography is the story of South Asia is in many ways tied to significant challenges which arise from the particular geographical context we have. Now, I will not highlight as much the role of China because in some ways the Himalayas, which form almost like a natural barrier between these two countries. But that said, today China occupies an important space in the context of India, and of course, I think the rest of the world. So I will only highlight China in the context of certain border issues and not the whole geopolitical context of China. I'll focus more on the neighbors, and because they matter to us, and we also matter to them. So that's the story I would like to highlight for everyone here. The primary context is the partition of India, because if you can see, as you can see in this slide, you see the British India, which was the colonial power here in this region. When it left India, what it ended up, what the region ended up being was to be separated into, of course, India and Pakistan. But a point I think some of you might know, but others might not, is the context of Bangladesh, which is the erstwhile East Pakistan. So in the context of South Asia, and I think world over, this is a very unique case wherein a country was created and it did not have a contiguous territory. That is, it had territory on one side of India, which is today's Pakistan or then West Pakistan, and a territory which is not at all connected to this portion here in East Pakistan. So the geography of this region severely affects the politics of all of these countries. And the partition has been, and in many ways, I would argue, continues to affect the relationship in our region and the memories of the partition. And in many ways, the unresolved dispute of the partition continue to have a significant impact of the neighborhood of the neighborly relations in South Asia. One primary one is the rivalry between India and Pakistan, because there are more disputes over the territory which is in Kashmir, which is in the northern part of India. So the geographical context does play a significant role, and as you all know, countries cannot choose their neighbors, and it compels these countries to deal with the different challenges that arise. I'll first highlight a little bit of the conflictual part, but I also want to then shed some light in terms of where India might go forward. The conflictual part with regarding to the borders and the geography, the major one is China. So far, in the context of South Asia, India-Pakistan relationship used to be the dominant story, but lately, India-China dispute or disputed relationship is now front and center, I would say, in international attention, actually. So the as the map represents, we have a very long land border, and the most of it is continues to be disputed. And the as you know, as this particular map illustrates here, the territories in orange are those areas with which India has disputes with China, and here, which is on the eastern part of our state of Arunachal Pradesh, and in this part of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, just for I think the audience, the area here in Aksai Chin is actually under the possession of China. And whereas the area listed here in Arunachal Pradesh is in possession and governed by India. So these are some ground realities that one also should pay attention. And in the recent past, in this year, the areas around these, the Galwan Valley, Pangong Tso, and Temcho, have become flashpoints, and for the first time in almost 40 odd years, there have been casualties in the Galwan Valley. So it seems to now the geography and the border between India and China is now in some way simmering. and both the countries are trying to take steps to de-escalate, but this is a situation that we have to wait and watch. Stepping back a little bit, and this is in many ways zooming in, is another standoff that India and China had in 2017, which is referred to as the Doklam standoff. Just to give you a quick referral once again, the 2017 standoff happened in this region, where Bhutan, India, Bhutan, and Sikkim border is located. So there was an earlier standoff, which at that time was peacefully resolved. But the geography seems to severely affect the relations in this country, in this region. So we have to, this is something of concern or note that we have to pay attention to. But that said, this, a similar geography, which is, with the context of Bangladesh, which is in the gray area here, is also being looked at as a potential opportunity where India can try to engage in inland water transit and trade. So this particular narrow stretch of land connects the Indian territory towards the 7 northeastern states of India, and in between, in some ways, I think, without any judgment, in between we find Bangladesh. So, both the countries are pursuing a closer relationship, and so far they have taken concrete steps to resolve the border disputes over some territories, and also the maritime area, which is in the southern part of Bangladesh and eastern part of India. So we have taken concrete steps to find cooperation, and there is significant potential to explore and the various options for cooperation. So this is something I wanted to also highlight, because yes, geography presents challenges, but it's also presenting some opportunities. And this is definitely, I would say, one potential bright spot in the Indian context. The other one that I want to also highlight in the Indian context is in the southern part of India, which is, Sri Lanka, and it straddles across what is referred to as the Park Strait here. And this is the part of what we refer to as Tamil Nadu, which is one of our provinces or states, as we call it. And the connection here is that the Tamil population, which is a linguistic group here in India, also is found in the northern and the eastern part of Sri Lanka. And there has been a long drawn-out conflict in Sri Lanka with a separatist group contesting and trying to establish a Tamil state in Sri Lanka. And they did draw upon support from the Tamils in India, and the insurgency was quelled in 2008 and 9. So today, Sri Lanka is taking steps to reconcile among the Tamils and also the Sinhalese. But that is something, it's a work in progress. I'm not, saying things are suddenly transformed to be good, but there are concrete efforts there. But the point I want to make here is, again, the geography of India, draws us into the affairs of our neighboring states. So, after pointing out to all of this, what I want to actually highlight a little bit more is what I want to argue is the democratic culture suffusing in this region, and this is based on very good research and evidence conducted by the Center for Study on Developing Societies, which is a think tank here in New Delhi, India, who have done an initial study in 2007-8, which is referred to as a state of democracy in South Asia. And what their findings show is, despite some challenges faced by the democratic processes there, the aspiration for democracy is very robust in all of these countries. There is definitely some support for for strong leadership or even the military playing a role, but that is very specific to Pakistan. But otherwise, the aspiration for democracy is really taken a root. The second point is with regarding to the meanings of democracy. Here, there is more than the formal meanings of democracy that we often refer to in terms of free speech, being able to form political parties and contesting elections. There is a more richer meaning and a wider meaning of democracy in India. And this extends to how people also expect the democratic processes to benefit people, not just as individuals, but also as belonging to groups. A third point is, all of these countries have really robust constitutional systems in place, but the promise is yet to be fully realized. So, and this is closely tied to the institutions, which are still maturing and which need some more time to really come play a role. One peculiar thing that is not to be observed in the South Asian context is the those institutions which are not directly chosen by people, that is members of parliament or the parliament primarily, like judiciary and even the army, they actually command a lot of faith from the people, whereas the elected representatives and the parliaments or the legislators are not do not score well in terms of the opinion, but people are very keen about it. A fifth point that I want to make in the in the democratic culture is all of these countries have a challenge to deal with the immense diversity, and this diversity is regional, ethnical, linguistic, religious, and there are continuous efforts to in all of these countries on how to accommodate these diverse needs. So that's something worth noting. A sixth point is there is robust party political competition in all of these countries, and the parties, the political parties, are the primary form of mobilization. And there is, in the Indian context, we also have very regional parties, that is parties which are limited only to a certain province. Of course, the large population of India does accommodate, I think Argentina's population is around 40 million or so. And I think that's the population of one of the states, closer to the population of one of the states that I come from in the southern part, Telangana. So whereas Uttar Pradesh, which is a state adjacent to New Delhi, has over 200 million people, which is the population equivalent of Brazil. So there is space for that also. But a point which is maybe of concern is beyond the parties and elections, the labor unions and other forms of mobilization are not very strong. And I think this is some, and I don't know if this is part of the larger global trend also, where labor unions have become quite weak. But this is something to note in all of these countries. A point, the point 8 that I want to also mention is many of these people, though, in all of these countries, do face a challenge, and they seek freedom from fear. And when I refer to fear, there I'm referring to actually state authorities potentially abusing power, like the police or even the armed forces. And I think that is something which countries in different countries in South America have also faced, where armed forces have from time to time interfered in the domestic affairs, and they engage in activities of indiscriminate violence, of disappearance and things like that. And that's a concern for all of these countries in South Asia. Freedom from want is something that they demand, and the countries do respond through large-scale anti-poverty measures, and that is something. Just I think the sheer size of the challenge will take some time. And finally, in the democratic culture idea, surveys have shown that they believe that the democracy is the only name of the game in this region. Although there are some times where, like in India in 75 to 77, there was an emergency rule or authoritarian rule, or say Maldives, which saw coups in the recent past. But the shift is always back towards democratic means. And Pakistan, for example, is now into its second time, or rather, this is the second civilian elected government, but does, which has, come to power without interruption from the armed forces. Although armed forces do play an important role, but the political outcomes through democracy is something that is understood. So if you want to take a look at South Asia, I think this can give a good insight and avenue to understand. So I have a few slides to just share in terms of where, if you are keen to gather more. There's the report from 2007 and 8, State of Democracy in South Asia. It's the website is lokniti.org, which undertakes it's part of the CSDS. And this is the just a brief introduction, or about the survey, and which is by the CSDS organization here in New Delhi. And finally, I want to leave with because I think when trying to look at South Asia, one has to, of course, focus on the domestic politics and primarily in what I would say democratic politics. This is a very interesting book, that could be mined by anyone interested. Now, unlike a lot of political analysis, which looks at how India votes or how Bangladesh votes or how other countries votes or how the Americans elections have happened. The focus of this book is to why India votes. Why do large number of people in India, and that's a case with other countries in South Asia also, where there is a significant turnout at election time. This book asks the question as to why India votes, and what we find some of the insights from this book is in terms of the attachment that people have with democracy. One particular way is the chance to vote is seen as a chance to exercise citizenship. In the respondents in this book say that that the government is essentially giving them a right and bringing the chance to vote. And they point out that this is the least I can do by turning up and voting. And a final snippet I will share is in the context of how, why I also say this political, the democratic culture is, it's cultural, is in India. And this, we'll see in South Asia also. The elections the casting the vote in the Hindi language is referred to as matdan, which is casting the vote, but actually it has more cultural significance of a cultural practice of offering something, which is, the dan is usually is a gesture of giving. And here today, our election commission, when there are elections, they refer to as matdan mahotsav, which is the votes festival. And that's a word that I've heard in my own region, where we speak the language, Telugu language, and they would say, refer to it as Votla Pandaga, and Pandaga is a festival. And so this kind of ingrained attachment to a democratic culture, I think, is something worth paying attention to if one wants to take a look at South Asia and primarily all our neighbors. So the centrality that I started, I think, and I want to point is with regarding to how, in many ways, the story of South Asia will be driven by the story of India. But India has to be sensitive to our neighbors because they have their own strong commitment to democracy also, and we have to respect that. And that's where I think it's a starting point for our region. And I welcome any questions or comments on my presentation. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, profesor Rashidip. Vamos a ceder la palabra ahora a la profesora Priti Singh. La señora Priti Singh es directora y profesora en el Centro de Estudios Canadienses, Estadounidenses y de América Latina de la Escuela de Estudios Internacionales de la Universidad Jawaharlal Nehru, Nueva Delhi. Ella enseña, bueno, justamente sobre política exterior latinoamericana e historia latinoamericana en el mencionado centro. Bueno, obviamente es especialista y tiene diversas publicaciones sobre las cuestiones de América Latina. Bueno, doctora Priti, bueno, un gusto contar con su presencia y le cedo la palabra.
Good morning to everyone and good evening. I'm going to be speaking today on India's relations with Argentina and concentrating on strategic partnership because as in fact, even Ambassador was just pointing out that in February of 2019, which was the 70th anniversary of diplomatic relations between India and Argentina, both the countries had agreed to elevate their relationship to a strategic partnership. I would like to share my PowerPoint. Is it visible? Okay, yeah. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is I attempt to define what strategic partnership means for India, talking about its usage in foreign policy, in Indian foreign policy, since it has come under some criticism. Then I offer a brief overview of Argentina's foreign policy, and then go on to discuss whether India-Argentina strategic engagement is an attempt at political image building or more a move towards a concrete economic relationship. And I'm arguing here that it is more a political intent that is reflected in both the countries, and therefore it's a step in the right direction. Starting with the Indian foreign policy approach. Now, it's often been a complaint of scholars that Indian foreign policy has been plagued by the absence of a grand strategy, that there's no real long-term strategic thinking, that it's prompted by a search for status and symbolism, that it's guided by its historic policy of non-alignment, a quest for strategic autonomy in decision-making, following the maxim of what is called cautious prudence. This means a distaste for entering into ironclad alliances and agreements. So India's international interests are shaped less by a strongly enunciated central idea and more situationally defined imperatives. And a strategic partnership used as a foreign policy tool allows it to do just that, which is what probably explains the wide range of India's strategic partners from United States to Rwanda. Actually, India did not even have a functional embassy at the time that it entered into a partnership with Rwanda, in Rwanda. So what does strategic partnership really mean? Now, with the end of the Cold War, there has been a proliferation of strategic partnerships in the international arena. But the concept really remains ill-defined. Nevertheless, we do know that they are bilateral in the membership. They're geared towards promotion of cooperation in areas where members are they are similarly positioned in their worldview. Now, if I take up the definition given by Jonathan Holslag, there are 5 main features to strategic partnership. One, common interests and expectations. They're formulated for the long term. They're multidimensional. They have a global range. And the relationship is one in which the objectives cannot really be achieved without a partnership. And that is what really serves to distinguish it from other relationships. So strategic partnerships are really important bilateral means to pursue certain core goals that have been identified. And instead of attempting to fix any definitional criteria, it's, I think, useful to view each strategic partnership as having a variable meaning. That is, it differs from one bilateral relationship to the other, and it marks the partner as special. So strategic partnership is not merely a descriptive concept, but it's really a political one. And unlike earlier alliance-based cooperation agreements, it does not require complete agreement or complete consonance in the value structures between the partners in order to become functional. They should simply have similar goals. So we are actually moving from a language which is discussing values to a discussion of common goals. So it's, in a sense, it's a pragmatic move. So the significance, what is the significance for this strategic partnership for India? For Indian foreign policy, there has been a change that is acknowledged, and that is the need for, we have acknowledged the need for interdependence in this globalized world. And this has been pushed forward by the immediate necessity of economic success. And of course, its search for status in the international system. So India is pragmatic, but it's also concerned about maintaining its own foreign policy autonomy, which is possible by closing the distance or traversing the value gap by the non-alliance character of strategic partnerships, where, you know, historical or present ideological leanings are not allowed to become a problem. What I'm saying is it makes it therefore politically convenient for a country which has been defined, which has been shaped in the past by its long history of non-alignment. So this is the strategic partnership is one where each partnership has a specific character focusing on certain issues. So let me then briefly talk about Argentina's foreign policy. A number of scholars, especially European American scholars, talking about Latin American economies, talk about development being the domestic imperative that has decisive weight in external decisions of all these states, which is based not only on the traditional economic goals like promotion of trade or financial assistance, but they talk about a development strategy. For one, Argentina is a middle-sized country with moderate strategic and economic significance in international affairs. Its foreign policy priorities are largely based on domestic political concerns and political pragmatism. And often Argentine politicians have been viewed as having short-term goals, which have more to do with controlling financial and material resources than with an ideological agenda, especially from the mid-20th century. Now, what is being said here is that ideology, it's not that ideology has not been important, just that it has been overwhelmed by the need to have access to resources. Secondly, Argentina's foreign policy priorities have been conditioned, or at least they were seen to be conditioned by domestic political factors that evolve with changing situations, including with changing governments. So it could be a diplomatic conflict, even if it is a rhetorical one with the United States. It could be relations with the Chinese, with whom they have a trade deficit. Argentina has a trade deficit, or complicated relationship with Brazil. So scholars have discussed this, at times, this apparently contradictory behavior of Argentina, making it swing between cooperation and confrontation, be it with the United States or be it with its neighbors. So they've called it, and that has given Argentina a reputation as an erratic and unpredictable actor in international affairs. This is the view of some American scholars. Yet I am arguing that despite economic instability, debt default, or social unrest, foreign policy has shown some important lines of continuity across the Argentinian administrations, which embodied serious commitments to peaceful resolution of conflict and cooperation, especially in the post-Cold War era. So what do I mean by this? Now, Argentina's foreign policy has been focused, especially recently, on increasing regional partnerships, consolidating of Mercosur. Now, while I say that, even its decision in April 2020 to exit trade negotiations with other nations like Singapore, South Korea, etc., does not mean that Argentina had abandoned Mercosur or is abandoning Mercosur. It's simply an attempt to protect national costs, unemployment during COVID-19. Though Latin America has seen a shocking, and again, I'm quoting certain scholars, they call it a shocking breakdown of regional coordination. And they talk about how, though there is bound to be a protracted economic crisis in the region, despite all that, Argentina, according to me, does continue to show a commitment, just as it had in the past, to institutionalizing regional groupings and resolving disputes. It has very actively it is dedicated to promotion of democracy. It's an active member of United Nations system. It's been a non-permanent member of UN Security Council. Argentine troops have been deployed in UN peacekeeping operations. It's been a member of key non-proliferation arrangements, and it has had a strong voice in support of nuclear non-proliferation. It's been a member of the Rio Group, WHO, ILO, etc., and party to many international environmental agreements like the Antarctic Treaty, Law of the Sea, nuclear test ban, etc. So, for example, from 2015, while Mauricio Macri had reoriented Argentina's foreign policy within the region and with respect to the United States, he had also encouraged more diverse relationships. In fact, Macri had taken a very pragmatic posture with countries like China and Russia. With China, Argentina has signed a strategic partnership in 2014, with Russia in 2016. And he did try and engage with countries like Australia, South Korea, Japan, arguably in order to expand the nation's options, avoiding an excess of dependency on a single ally. Similarly, Alberto Fernandez needs to also take a pragmatic approach, because Argentina is facing high unemployment, rising inflation, diminishing foreign reserves. And Argentina also is dependent for trade on Brazil and on Mercosur. So coming to India and Argentina, since the end of the Cold War, actors have departed from the alliance paradigm. That's what I'm arguing, and instead have been embracing the strategic partnerships. I think US has more than 70 strategic partnerships, India perhaps more than 30. And for China too, strategic partnerships have a very clear, China has a very clear purpose in sight as far as strategic partnerships is concerned, to shape its own to shape the international environment in such a way that it is propitious for China's rise globally. In fact, a Chinese scholar has argued that China's strategic partnerships with Latin America are considered to be economic in nature, and they're driven by its growth mode. And they do not address conditions like democracy, human rights, or even environmental issues. Whereas for India, the interest has not been economic alone. In Latin America, India has entered into strategic partnerships with Brazil in 2006, with Mexico in 2016, and now with Argentina in 2019. And if I take up the example of Brazil, this strategic partnership came after several high-profile visits by President Lula at the time to India. And of course, in return, our Prime Minister had gone to Brazil. And we have to keep in mind that it was soon followed by the formation of BRICS by 2009. And I would also like to mention out here that it's very interesting to note that India's largest economic partner at the time in the region was Venezuela. But India did not sign any strategic partnership. And this supports the claim, to a certain extent, that India's strategic engagement in Latin America is not driven by transactional concerns or economic concerns alone. I'm not saying that economic concerns are not there at all. Certainly, they are there, but it's not that alone. So if we look at, very quickly at the political relations, defense and economic relations, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this. But in political relations, look at the non-aligned movement, NAM. Now, Argentina has been a supporter of NAM in the past. It had joined NAM in 1964 and as an observer, became a full member in 1973, withdrew from NAM in 1991, but joined back NAM in 2006. Of course, it was only as an invited guest, not an observer, not a full member. But all I'm saying is that this should not be interpreted as an example of Argentina's display of any inconsistency in terms of its foreign policy postures, but be viewed more as a kind of innovative mechanism towards global participation or towards global integration. Something like Chile becoming a member of APEC. Also, I would like to add here, that the strategic partnership idea between India and Argentina was discussed about a decade ago in 2009 when President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner had visited India at the 60th anniversary of celebrating India-Argentine diplomatic relations. And several MOUs had been signed, and it was agreed that they would move towards a strategic partnership, but it came into fruition only with President Macri in 2019, after several meetings between Modi and Macri. So I'm only pointing to the continuity out here in the postures of these countries. Then United Nations Security Council reforms. Again, I would say that it's not as if Argentina's and India's strategic interests have not diverged. They have often diverged. In fact, Argentina was a part of an informal coffee club that had been formed in '97 to hold back reforms to the UN Security Council, because at the time they were opposing Brazil becoming a permanent member. And now the club was not against Security Council reforms itself. It simply wanted non-permanent seats increased for its members. Now, during the visit of Argentine former President Macri to India, both the leaders, Indian and Argentine leaders, had emphasized or reaffirmed the need for a comprehensive reform of the UN Security Council to make it more representative, accountable, and effective. And Argentina has also now supported India's bid for the membership of the Nuclear Supplier Group in 2016, and has conveyed its support to India's nuclear energy needs. As far as defense cooperation, again, there are several, agreements have been signed, and ISRO had launched an Argentine nanosatellite on board of its PSLV of India in 2007. 2018 was the framework agreement on cooperation on peaceful uses of outer space. And there are agreements on peaceful uses of nuclear energy that have been signed. An MOU has been signed between Department of Atomic Energy of India and National Atomic Energy Commission of Argentina for cooperation within the framework of Global Center for Nuclear Energy Partnership to bolster institutional linkages. And of course, they have both agreed that there's a joint declaration for fight against terrorism as well. I'm just going to skip over all this. Economic cooperation, well, of course, both countries have recognized the importance of their services sector. But what I would really like to bring out here, and this has been oft repeated, so again, I won't spend too much time on this. For Indian imports from Argentina, I think about 86% of the shipment is in terms of soybean oil, petroleum, copper, sunflower oil, etc. But India, in turn, exports to not just Argentina, but most of the Latin American countries a more diversified basket of goods, organic chemicals, auto parts, vehicles, machinery, etc. So this is a gap that we are looking towards bridging. As far as investments are concerned, Indian firms are investing in Argentina, but from the side of Argentina, investments are, I think Argentina, according to the IDB Exim Bank report, which was published in 2019, Argentina came in fourth from amongst the Latin American countries with inflows of about 30 odd million US dollars into India. Then, of course, there have been several other agreements in renewable energy, which has been signed. They have acknowledged bilateral cooperation in the mining sector, especially for lithium and pharmaceuticals. So in conclusion, what I really would like to say is that while India has signed a number of strategic partnerships, including with US and with China, Argentina does not have as many strategic partnerships, but it is soon catching up. Argentina and India are both medium-sized countries. They are less developed states in an increasingly and highly interdependent environment. And they're seeking to pursue more than simply power and more than simply relative economic gains. And Argentina's active involvement regionally to defend democracy, human rights, etc., illustrates this fact. Both countries are concerned with the kind of rewards that only come from cooperative games like image, reputation, and identity building. And their participation in multilateral endeavors is driven more by the intention to address domestic needs rather than simply a reduction of transaction costs. In fact, for India, it also helps to put rest the perception that Brazil remains the focus of India's Latin American policy. In fact, an observer reacting to a lecture that had been delivered by India's Minister of External Affairs, S. Jaishankar, in last year, this is a last year lecture in November 2019, had emphasized that what is important is a strategic intent of these countries, of India and Argentina. And it is not to be confused with a plan, because intent implies a well-conceived long-term goal. And this intent is what India has been lacking so far, as opposed to countries such as US or China. And India is now, India needs to roll with this changed global situation and use this opportunity, which means one has to be flexible and has to realign oneself. And thus, strategic partnerships are one important way to go. Thank you. I'll stop here. I'm not very sure as to.
Bueno, thank you very much, Professor Preeti Singh. Ahora voy a cederle la palabra a la señora Yasbel Singh Kaur. La señora Yasbel es conductora de Canal Diplomático TV, dirigente política y empresaria inmobiliaria perteneciente a la comunidad Sikh del nordeste argentino, y ella nos compartirá justamente sus conocimientos sobre la diáspora de la India aquí en Argentina, en el nordeste. La señorita Yasbel, bueno, muchas gracias por su presencia y le cedo la palabra. Señora Yasbel. Esperemos unos minutos, que tienen inconvenientes técnicos.
Mientras ahí Yasbel nos escucha bien a nosotros, pero está silenciada Yasbel, por ahí es por eso.
Ahí
Ahí
está.
va. Ahora sí. Gracias.
Perdón. Buenos días a todos, buenos días a los organizadores. Felicitaciones. Buenos días al señor embajador y a los disertantes de hoy. I'm sorry I will talk in Spanish. Later I will send it by mail, the translation. Okay? Así que bueno, hablar de la India acá en el noroeste argentino todavía es algo místico, es algo exótico. ¿Sí? La colectividad aquí es pequeñísima, son más o menos 180 personas nativas de Punjab, o sea, el 100% de los indostánicos que están acá en el noroeste argentino, básicamente en Jujuy, Tucumán y Salta, son de Punjab y son pertenecientes a la religión Sikh. Ellos, bueno, fueron llegando a lo largo del siglo XX, y son de alguna manera pintorescos porque se destacan mucho porque son comerciantes conocidos, conocidos por su nobleza. Hay localidades, pueblos, ciudades donde hay solo una familia indostánica y son muy queridos, ¿no? Ellos de alguna manera son como embajadores de la India porque más allá de su aspecto cultural, mantienen sus costumbres y la comparten con los lugartenientes. Al principio del siglo XX, la corriente que fue llegando, que salió de Punjab y fue llegando a América, en principio viajar a América era un término, el término se consideraba a Estados Unidos, se referían a Estados Unidos. No sabían que muchos no sabían que América era un continente extenso, en el que, bueno, cuando desembarcaron se dieron con diferentes sorpresas y de esa manera se fueron estableciendo y algunos de ellos llegaron a centro-sur de Argentina. No es el caso del noroeste argentino. Voy a basar particularmente la historia me voy a basar en la historia de mi tío abuelo que vino en el año 1941. Salió de la India en plena revolución de la colonización británica en India. Él fue uno de los perseguidos políticos, fue un grupo que decidió salir, ellos sí sabían que venían a Sudamérica, entonces un grupo se quedó en Brasil y mi tío abuelo con otro compañero llegaron a Argentina, pero con una realidad que quizás para la que no estaban preparados. No es lo mismo llegar a Europa, a Norteamérica, que llegar a Latinoamérica, donde prácticamente no se cruzan con nadie que sea de su patria, con quien puedan hablar en su idioma, con quien puedan compartir platos típicos. Todo lo contrario, acá se encontraron con respecto a la gastronomía, con diversa cantidad de platos, pero todos con carne vacuna, algo totalmente contrapuesto a las costumbres de ellos. Esa fue una de las transiciones más difíciles que tuvieron que pasar, además de la barrera del idioma y de no tener con quién compartir, o al ser también religiosos, con quién realizar cánticos religiosos, realizar ceremonias exclusivas en diferentes fechas, ¿no? Cuando él llegó, estuvo bueno en Buenos Aires, Santa Fe, unos años, hasta que supo que había Sikh indostánicos en Tucumán, que fue la corriente que llegó después después de la década del 20, perdón, recomendados por los ingleses, ya que ellos formaban parte del ejército, habían sido reclutados por el ejército inglés, entonces habían sido recomendados para trabajar en empresas ferroviarias inglesas, en ingenios azucareros, y ellos habían llegado más o menos en esa época, en la década del 20. Entonces mi tío abuelo fue al encuentro de ellos, eran personas mucho mayores que él, pero la alegría marcó un precedente, un antes y un después en su llegada a Argentina. Pudo compartir con ellos, sentirse un poco en casa, y eso fue también un poco un combustible para poder progresar, prosperar y salir adelante. Muy cerquita de Tucumán está la localidad de Rosario de la Frontera, en la provincia de Salta. Ahí es donde él se estableció, sentó base, se casó con una argentina que supo compartir ampliamente su cultura y lo ayudó a poder sostener. Él prácticamente solo tuvo tanta fuerza y tanto amor a su cultura que las fechas específicas, Día de la Independencia, Día de la República o alguna festividad importante, él realizaba ciertas ceremonias y hacía partícipe, invitaba a las autoridades, invitaba a docentes para que tomen conocimiento de dónde venía él, cuál era su cultura, y él vino con toda la fuerza de la cultura del trabajo, que es típica de los indostánicos, y forjó un gran patrimonio. Eso lo ayudó a invitar a muchos amigos, familiares, vecinos de él de la India, a que puedan venir a Argentina a trazar nuevos horizontes, ¿no? Argentina en su pleno auge, en un excelente tiempo que se estaba viviendo, avisoraba muy buena prosperidad para los que podían venir desde afuera, especialmente en el caso de mi tío abuelo, que tenía cómo acobijarlos, los acobijaba en su propia casa, le daba trabajo, ya se dedicaba a la agricultura, que era su trabajo de cuna en India, también era comerciante, era transportista, entonces tenía un abanico de oportunidades para ofrecerles a sus compatriotas. Y de esa manera fue logrando establecer una comunidad indostánica acá en el noroeste argentino. Bueno, y uno de los que vino gracias a él es mi papá y bueno, luego mi mamá, ¿no? Entonces él también fundó la Sociedad Indo-Argentina, participó en muchísimos actos oficiales, incluso participó de la delegación que viajó en ese entonces a India junto con el presidente Raúl Alfonsín. Y bueno, también después junto cuando ya se acrecentó acá la colectividad, decidieron crear un templo Sikh. No tenían un gurdwara. Y bueno, entre todos, con mucho sacrificio, ladrillo a ladrillo, construyeron un hermoso templo Sikh, el primero de Sudamérica, que se encuentra en Rosario de la Frontera. Fue fundado en 1995. Y no es solamente hoy una casa de Dios, sino es un pequeño Punjab, una pequeña India para todos, para que puedan compartir, poder dialogar en sus idiomas, compartir platos típicos, cánticos religiosos, ceremonias religiosas, un sinfín de cuestiones. Así que realmente lo que nos dejó mi tío abuelo Dan Singh fue un legado muy amplio, que gracias a Dios tenemos la oportunidad de seguirlos, los hijos de él, en este caso desde mi familia también. Y luego, bueno, tuve también una vivencia también particular a lo largo de mi vida, porque siempre fue un compromiso muy grande ser descendiente indostánica. En mi caso soy de primera generación, de poder, de llegar esa información de lo que significa India, de todas las preguntas infinitas que surgen acá sobre India. No alcanzaron discursos en los actos, no alcanzaban artículos en diferentes periódicos. Y hace unos años participé políticamente como candidata a diputada nacional en un espacio que se disputaba entre la segunda y la tercera fuerza en la provincia de Salta. Entonces la responsabilidad era grande y había que recorrer mucho la provincia, casi todas las localidades, pueblos, ciudades, casa por casa. Y sinceramente fue algo muy particular esa vivencia, porque con todas las personas el 50% de las conversaciones eran de política, pero el 50% surgía de mi nombre. A ver, ¿qué significa tu nombre? ¿De dónde es? Ah, de la India, del país de Gandhi, del país de los elefantes, del país de la vaca sagrada. Entonces era algo tan maravilloso poder evacuar tantas preguntas que ellos tenían sobre el bindi, sobre el tercer ojo, sobre el matrimonio en la India, sobre la mujer en la India. Y realmente fue muy emotivo, y muy emotivo realmente poder llevar toda esa información, esa difusión y traer un poquito de esa cultura a cada uno de los hogares, porque sin exagerar, en todas las conversaciones siempre estaba presente India. Y bueno, no llegué a la banca nacional, quedé a 1%, pero eso que se pudo sembrar y esa cosecha que obtuve en nombre de toda la comunidad indostánica, de saber realmente la importancia y el amor que tienen los argentinos a los indostánicos, o al conocer, ese sentido de querer conocer, esa intriga de querer conocer más sobre India. Y luego de eso también fui invitada a dar una conferencia en Holanda, en La Haya, también para hablar un poco sobre la diáspora de la India, porque de ahí surgió todo, de una difusión de que acá había una pequeña colectividad de la India, y un poco comentar cuál es la vivencia, ¿no? de ser poquitos y no ser muchos como en Europa o Norteamérica, en la que casi todos saben más o menos de dónde vienen, cuáles son sus culturas y cómo viven. Fue muy importante, fue de gran orgullo poder llevar los testimonios de la vida de los indostánicos acá en el noroeste argentino a Holanda. Y luego, bueno, ningún evento alcanzó, incluso acá hemos colaborado para que se levante una academia de danzas de la India, de Bhangra, de Gita, de Bollywood, pero no, sentí que no alcanzaba, entonces decidí con mi familia, con un gran equipo de trabajo, muchos colaboradores, lanzar Café Diplomático, un programa televisivo en el que se pueda difundir la cultura de la India, aunque sea de manera aleatoria, y realmente cada vez que tratamos un tema de la India, la difusión es tremenda, los mensajes llenan la casilla del celular realmente, cada vez que hablamos de religión, cada vez que hablamos sobre Ayurveda, de las costumbres, de la gastronomía, es impresionante. El año pasado empezamos Café Diplomático a modo prueba, y este año ya estamos con la segunda temporada de Café Diplomático. También hicimos ya varios programas con las temáticas de la India, y realmente es muy emotivo y sorprendente cada vez más saber el interés que tiene y el amor realmente que tiene y el respeto que tiene la sociedad argentina hacia todo lo relacionado con la India, incluso conocer que el vínculo que existe entre India y Argentina, el vínculo comercial, político y diplomático que existe, cada vez está más cerca, cada vez se interactúa más, y eso realmente es muy complaciente. Así que, bueno, yo agradezco mucho esta oportunidad, agradezco a la Universidad de La Plata, Agostina, Ezequiel, agradezco al embajador Dinesh Bhatia, que realmente es un gran embajador, vino el año pasado y este año contra viento y marea, no paró de realizar actividades, y realmente agradecerle y felicitarlo también por este medio, y decirle que para la embajada, sinceramente, jamás fuimos un número, siempre fuimos nombre y apellido cada uno de los integrantes de la colectividad indostánica, y eso es realmente muy lindo. Así que muchísimas gracias.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Chasbel. Bueno, para ir terminando, nuestra última expositora, ella es la señora Sonia Surabhigupta. Ella es profesora en estudios latinoamericanos de Jamia Millia Islamia Maía, de Nueva Delhi. Sus investigaciones se centran alrededor del diálogo cross-cultural entre India y América Latina en el contexto del sur global. Ha tenido, bueno, una amplia trayectoria, no solamente académica, sino institucional, en el desarrollo de los estudios latinoamericanos en India, justamente como fundadora del Centro de Estudios Latinoamericanos y Españoles de la mencionada institución. Ha realizado traducciones al hindi de obras, bueno, de Gabriel García Márquez, José Ortega y Gasset, Rodolfo Walsh, Camilo José Cela, entre otros. Y bueno, justamente entre sus otras obras ha editado una antología sobre historias de mujeres indias. Dicho eso, bueno, señora Gupta, le cedo la palabra y gracias por compartir estos momentos con nosotros.
Muchas gracias, Ezequiel. Se me oye, ¿no? Sí. Pues muy buenos días a todos los colegas de IRI y de la Universidad de La Plata. Yo tuve el placer el privilegio, digamos, de estar con ustedes hace casi una década y guardo muy bonitos recuerdos de mi estancia en Buenos Aires, en La Plata. También estuve en Córdoba, en la Universidad Nacional de Rosario, y de verdad fue una experiencia tremenda. So good morning to all the Argentinian colleagues. Good morning, Excellency. And of course, good evening to my other colleague from India. I am going to speak on something very interesting, actually. It's the Argentinian translations of the Indian saint poet Kabir. So let me begin by saying who Kabir is. Kabir is one of the most important poets of the Bhakti movement. So what is Bhakti? It's the devotional poetry, la poesía mística devocional. Kabir belongs to the early modern period, that's 14th, 15th century, and he belongs to the north of India. And he was introduced to the West in English translation by Rabindranath Tagore. And this was in 1915. If you remember, Tagore got his Nobel Prize in Literature in 1913. And one of the first books that he translated, one of the first books that reached the West through translation, which was not his, is Kabir's 100 Poemas, or 100 Poems of Kabir. Since then, Kabir has been translated many, many times in the Spanish-speaking world. And there have been editions and re-editions of his songs, his poems. And these editions, these translations, and also their reception, the context of their reception, I think merit a scholarly attention which has hitherto not been done. And so this is a work in progress. I have looked at several translations, and I'm amazed to find so many translations in Latin America of Kabir Das Ji, of our Kabir, our poet. But what I'm going to do in this presentation is to analyze and discuss two of the earliest translations of Kabir's poems in Spanish, which were done about a century back. And these translations were undertaken and published by two Argentinians. And one of these Argentinians happens to be none other than the founder of the University of La Plata, Joaquín B. González. And he did this translation right there in 1915. So I thought that it would be even more interesting to talk about this particular work of translation, because, I mean, La Plata, the founder of La Plata was one of the earliest translator of Kabir. The other one is also an Argentinian by the name Carlos Muccio Sainz Peña. And this was in 1915, 1916. I'm wondering if the presentation is going on. Rohit, may I request you to please present? Can you please present, Rohit? Yeah, so Rohit will, my colleague Rohit is helping me out with the presentation because there's something wrong with my laptop and I'm coming in through my phone. Rohit will put you up the presentation, but what I can tell you is that Kabir was a 15th century poet, and he's known as a rebel poet, un poeta rebelde, and he was a rebel poet, and I'll tell you why later. But he holds an enormous appeal in northern India, cutting across differences of caste, class, and community, and his devotional poetry. Come on. Is the presentation going on? I can't see it.
Yeah, ma'am. I'm presenting.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah. So, yeah, 1 second. Yes. So I was telling you
If there
about
is a problem,
Kabir.
I can do so.
See?
If there is a problem with the presentation, I can do so here.
Ah, good. Okay.
Okay, just one moment, please.
Yeah. So his devotional poetry is a part of, makeup. But more importantly, more recently, there has been an absolutely enormous amount of burgeoning scholarship, particularly in recent times. And though his details are a little difficult to put together, scholars who have researched on him believe that Kabir, can we have the slide on Kabir, please? Yeah, this is the Saint Kabir. And this is 100 poems of Kabir. And this is, yeah, that's where, please. This is Joaquin Gonzalez. And this is the journal Nosotros, in which Carlos Musio Sainz Peña published his translations of Kabir. Can we come to the next? Yeah. So the scholars believe that he was born in 1440 and he died in 1580. So 2018, the 500 years of the death of Kabir were observed in India. And this is his mazar, that is his mausoleum, La Tumba del Poeta. So this is in Maghar, which is in Uttar Pradesh in the north of India. The next slide, please. So when these commemorations took place, the Prime Minister of India, Shri Narendra Modi ji, on June 28, 2018, went to his mazar to offer his prayers and also announced the founding of an academy. And this is the inaugural ceremony of that academy. The idea of the government of India is to sponsor international level research on this 15th century saint poet who's revered across India. So the argument that I'm making in this presentation is that there has been an extraordinary meeting of Argentinian and Indian minds. And I say that the translation or the renderings of Kabir's poems into Spanish by these two extremely renowned Argentinians is actually an cross-cultural, non-hierarchical dialogue between Argentinian and Indian intellectual traditions. And it came at a time when it served to disrupt the Eurocentric world order that had begun to crumble anyways around with the 1880s. I think I'm done with the presentation. So thank you very much. I'll come to it towards the end, so it can be removed. Yeah, thank you. I don't need the presentation anymore. Yeah, so let me tell you. Yeah, so I'm done with the presentation. Thanks. So the two Argentinian translators of Tagore, one which is the 100 poems of Kabir, that is 100 poemas de Kabir, Joaquin B. Gonzalez and Carlos Musio Sainz Peña, as I said, are extremely well-known turn-of-the-century Argentinian intellectuals, and they were assiduous readers of Oriental literatures and philosophies. They were contemporaries of Rabindranath Tagore, and they were important men of their time. I have mentioned that Joaquin B. Gonzalez was the rector of the Universidad de La Plata. He belonged to the reformist oligarchy and is considered one of the last exponents of the so-called generation of the 1880s. He was deeply interested in Tagore, and many consider the introduction, the prologue that he has written to 100 Poemas de Kabir in 1915 to 1918. It is a part of his complete works, his obras completas. And the prologue that he has written, many scholars consider it to be his spiritual testament. And I think it is worth taking up the translation of this particular prologue into English, and I'm certainly planning to do so. In this extensive prologue to 100 Poemas de Kabir, Gonzalez basically borrows from Tagore his conception of love as the basis of humanity and of Argentinian nationhood. So it is in this immediate background of the history of Argentina, of hate, of rancor, and a lot of violence. And I'm going to quote from this prologue a small piece, and I'm going to say it in English, or maybe I can read it in Spanish actually. So he says, cuando pude leer a Tagore, mi regocijo no tuvo límites al poder reforzar mi pobre voz con la de aquellos preclaros instrumentos de la música de amor. En Sadhana de Tagore, dice González, y cita a Tagore, la necesidad de amor es una especie de encallecimiento, pues el amor es la perfección de la conciencia. So this is this quote on love as the basis of humanism from Tagore was something that Joaquín González quoted again and again, and he mentions it. He he citado ya muchas veces en mis conversaciones, pláticas y discursos con los alumnos de escuelas y universidades. So I think this is a contact which really needs to be looked into, because it feeds into the conception of the Argentinian nationhood. It's not just a translation of Kabir through Tagore, but I think the point that I'm trying to make is that there is this entanglement, these are these crossed histories which are still to be discovered. Carlos Museo Sáenz Peña was a foreign languages and Argentine literature teacher, and subsequently he was the editor of El Mundo, the newspapers, which of course the Argentinians know because of the Mafalda fame in the 1960s. He was a poet, a writer, and a translator, and both of them were also translators, that is Joaquín B. González and Museo Sáenz Peña were also translators of the Rubaiyats of Omar Khayyam. Both had translated works of Tagore. Museo Sáenz Peña rendered the first full translation of Tagore's The Gardener, El Jardinero, and is the author of books such as El Misticismo de los Poetas Persas, a book of poems titled Sansara, a book of prose fiction called Las Veladas de Ramadan, the Ramzan evenings, and a novel titled El Babu de Narayana. I have just been able to get this this novel, which I think is 1930s. I'm not sure of the date yet, but I've got it online and I'm in the process of reading this. So it has got an Indian protagonist. So these titles clearly show that there was an Orientalist vector in the intellectual generation of the 1880s. In fact, Museo Sáenz Peña belonged to a group called Academia Omnia, whose other members include noted Argentine intellectuals, among them Aníbal Ponce. So he was also the editor of this journal called Nosotros, where the first translations of Kabir appeared. So I'm going to the next section of my talk, which is on looking at translations of Kabir in Latin America as disrupting an Anglo-centric or Eurocentric world order. We know that the modernists in Latin America were inventing a new poetic idiom at this time. And this is the time when Kabir's translations are taking place. So they came out in, the English translations came out in 1915 through Tagore's translation. And as you know, Tagore in 1913 had become the first non-European to have been awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. And Kabir was the only poet that Tagore translated apart from himself. And so one would agree with Thomas de Bruyn that in early 20th century, when modern cultural identities were being formed, of all the translations from Indian texts, Rabindranath Tagore's 100 poems of Kabir has been the most influential on the image of Indian culture and literature, both inside and outside the subcontinent. If you look at the kind of works which have been translated into Spanish from India, there would be a predominance of Sanskrit and more lately of Indian works in Indian writing in English, which is why Rabindranath Tagore's translation of Kabir's poetry, which has then occasioned several further translations, is indeed interesting and has created this interest in this figure of this weaver poet who did not write in Sanskrit, because Sanskrit was the language of the elites, of the Brahmanical elite. He wrote in vernacular Hindi. And Latin America's encounter with alternative modernities is in a great way influenced not just by the Sanskrit text, but also by Kabir's poetry. You will be surprised to see the number of editions of Kabir's poetry that have come out in different parts of Latin America in Spanish. So, of course, in Spain also. Let me say a few words about who Kabir is. I have said that he's a medieval mystic poet or devotional poet, but he represents the subordinate strand in what is known as the Nirguni tradition of North Indian devotional poetry. So what is Nirguni tradition? It is a tradition which believes in a nameless and formless God. Nirgun means without any quality, Nirgun. And therefore, this is, of course, I can't go into the details of it, but basically it It came from an egalitarian social order which rejected the all-male Brahmanical Vedic Hinduism, as well as the dominant Sagun Bhakti tradition, the other tradition which kind of believed in the caste system and, you know, in this hierarchically structured Varna system in India. So Kabir was, of course, absolutely anti-caste. The Nirgun tradition of bhakti or devotion, which was adopted mainly by the low caste groups and was expressed not in Sanskrit, but in the vernacular languages of North India. Therefore, it is not very surprising that there are not many translations of saint poets from India who have a huge presence in our spiritual world and in our popular culture, but they have not been translated so much. The Sanskrit texts have been translated, and in that sense, Kabir's translations are certainly an exception. While I talk about the Argentinian translations, I'd also like to tell you some notable Latin American editions of Kabir's translations. So these are, one was done by a Spanish Republican exile called Benjamin Cano Ruiz. This was in 1945, and this was, of course, in Mexico. In Spain, the well-known translator of Tagore's work, Zenobia Camprubí, the wife of Juan Ramón Jiménez, another Nobel Prize of Literature, 1953. She translated songs of Kabir, and they were published posthumously in 1965. And those are the Cien Poemas de Kabir which are more well-known than the ones which were originally done by Joaquín B. González. So, so these are all from Tagore's English translations. But more recently, there have been translations of Kabir directly from Hindi to Spanish, most notably by the renowned Kabir scholar David Lorenzen and Mariela Alvarez at the Center for Asian and African Studies of the El Colegio de Mexico. These have been done in the 90s. So given the interest in Indian mysticism in Spain, of course, there are several translations done by publishing house which specialize in Indology and have deep interest in mysticism. So in our view, the fact that Tagore chose to translate Kabir, a low caste, unlettered poet of the bhakti, of the devotional poetry tradition, is significant because it construes a move towards carving out an alternative tradition of the emerging nation. India was emerging as a nation, still a colony of the British. So this new nation was being imagined in a way which was very different from the British Orientalist. And that is why noted Hindi scholar Purushottam Agrawal has argued against colonial historical category of stagnant medieval times. So the British historiography looks at the medieval times as stagnant. But for us, we can say that actually Kabir represents the beginning of India's indigenous modernity, because it is argued that modernity came only with colonialism. No, Kabir, with his kind of, this kind of attack on ritual and organized religion, is certainly a form of modern, which is why Milind Vakankar argues that Kabir has today become synonymous with a typically post-colonial question in India. Can there be an indigenous modernity indebted to, but at the same time different from the idea of Europe? So the idea is not to negate Europe, but to say that there is also a pre-European, pre-British colonial indigenous modernity. So Tagore's motivation for translating Kabir is clear. For him, the basis of civilizational unity in a country with such diversity and heterogeneity in India, and I'm quoting Tagore now, he says, it has come through our saints like Nanak, Kabir, Chaitanya, and others, preaching one God to all races of India. So he founded, Tagore, as you know, founded the Vishwa Bharati University in Shantiniketan, quite like Joaquín B. González, who was the founder, who was a great educationist and founder of La Plata University. And Tagore founded it as a counterfoil to colonial education. And in this university is where serious efforts were undertaken to study the Bhakti poets, including Kabir. So I'll come now to the connection with Argentina. I have pointed out that Latin American modernistas like Martí, like Rubén Darío, like the Mexican Gutiérrez Nájera, like the Cuban Julián del Casal, or the Argentinian Leopoldo Lugones had deep interest in the Orient. Until now, when we studied in JNU, we were said that it is like stylistic device. So when Rubén Darío talks about the Princess of Golconda, basically they're saying this is escapism. But today, there is a different reading of that kind of interest in the Orient, that it was not just a stylistic device, but in fact, it should be seen as a move to open other possibilities for new social relations away from the colonial relations, and to connect with alterities outside the colonial systems of relations. And I think here lies the seed of third worldism as well as of global South. So Argentine Orientalism, of course, is very special. As I said, it is an important element in the construction of the Argentine nationhood. If we go back to Domingo Faustino Sarmiento, you will know that his text, Facundo, which is considered a foundational text of the Argentine nationhood, is where one finds the first images of the Orient in terms of Arabs, of course, but it abounds in ideas of Asiatic despotism. So the enlightened Argentine letrados were still giving the positivist and racial theories about, Arab immigrants, of course, who have come in big numbers. And I think Jazbel's talk, therefore, is very interesting because, there might be a very small community of Indians there, but I think Argentina has been a land of diaspora, and Arab immigrants form a huge part, apart from the European immigrants who came in the end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century. So it is with Modernismo, and it is with people like González and Museo Sáenz Peña, and it was with this generation of 1880s that the Orient is now not looked at as the despotic as Asian despotism or with the kind of racial theories, but it is looked at as, as a source of as a social concern. The Orient becomes a social concern. And especially for the Argentinian Leopoldo Lugones, the role of Orientalism would be conceived in a very different way. So what I argue is that the translations of Kabir by these Argentine Orientalists fall precisely in this category of the new Orientalist discourse, which was political, which was socially aware, which was interested in connecting with others, which was non-European, in its essence. I can tell you that in Argentina, the Spanish translations of the Arabian Nights, Ramayana, Bhagavad Gita, for example, came out in 1896. So it's the generation of 1880s, which was the Rubaiyats of Omar Khayyam. So, and the discovery of the works of Rabindranath Tagore prepared the Argentine reader for the cultural reception of an unimagined universality. And cultured non-conformists like Carlos Museo Sáenz Peña responded to the imperative that Axel Gasquet has called El Llamado del Oriente, the call of the Orient, the aspiration being deciphering a new type of civilization which would replace European positivism. So now I come towards the end of my talk and I talk about the text and its translation. So since Kabir was a poet-singer, his works till date are mainly sung as devotional songs, and therefore they are a part of the oral tradition in India, part of the popular memory. And though there were written collections done later, we don't know what was an original composition of Kabir and what was done by his devotees. But now, with great trouble, with taking huge amount of pains, scholars have been able to put together what was actually originally written by Kabir. And here, for example, is the book which is called The Bijak of Kabir, which has been done by Linda Hess and Sukhdev Singh, and this contains the original work of Kabir. Now, Joaquin González finds in Bhakti, in his prologue, he writes that he finds in Bhakti the Christian-like devotion to a personal God. And in his prologue to the translation, he compares the mystic and human love in Kabir's poems to the mystic fervor in the poems of San Juan de la Cruz, Santa Teresa de Avila, and Santa Catalina de Siena. He worked on the translations from 1915 to 1918, though they were published initially in 1915, but the final definitive volume came out in the 1920s. Carlos Museo Sáenz Peña, on the other hand, underlines in his introduction to Kabir in November 1915, they came out in Nosotros. He underlines the syncretism and the highly moral humanism that he discerns in the poet's work. So what I'll do now is that I'll take you to one such translation. May I request you, Ezequiel, to please put the presentation once again? So, yes, this is, yes, please come to slide, the next one, please. And the next. Yes, so here is the, por favor, see, translations of Kabir's. So what I'm looking at is this particular verse, which is called Moko Kaha Dhoonde Re Bande. For those of us who know Hindi, of course, this will be very familiar. I'm sure, Ambassador, you will. So, am I audible? Yeah. So, Rabindranath Tagore has done this very flat translation, actually, which has also been kind of sometimes criticized for being too flat. So, O servant, where dost thou seek me? Lo, I am beside thee. What I will take you to end and not detain you too much in the English translation, which is here already on the screen in Hindi and in English. May I have the next slide, please? Yes, so here I have given you the two translations, one by Joaquin Gonzalez and the other one by Carlos Musio Sainz Peña. Look at the one by Joaquin B. González. ¿Dónde me buscas, oh servidor mío? Mírame, estoy junto a ti. No estoy en el templo, ni en la mezquita, ni en el santuario de la Meca, ni en la morada de las divinidades hindúes. No estoy en los ritos y las ceremonias, ni en el ascetismo y sus renunciaciones. Si me buscas de veras, me verás enseguida y llegará el momento en que me encuentres. Kabir dice, Dios, oh santo, es el aliento de todo lo que respira. So as you can see, it is quite close to the translation done by Tagore. But Carlos Musio Sainz Peña actually tries to capture the poetic rhythm and the orality of Kabir, and this aspect of social criticism that he had put so much emphasis on in his introduction to his translations. And I really like his translation. So let me read it for you. Oh, mi siervo, ¿por qué me buscas fuera si estoy dentro de ti? Ni en la blanca sauilla venerada por los viejos derviches, ni en el templo vetusto, frecuentado por silenciosos monjes me hallarás. Nunca he morado en la Kaaba santa, ni en el Kailash viví, ni de los yogis aprendí a despreciar el bien terreno. Ni vanas ceremonias, ni rituales hicieron de mi espíritu un esclavo. Búscame con amor, ten esperanza, pronto me encontrarás. Dice Kabir, oh sadhu, Dios el justo es aliento de todos los alientos. So I'll just conclude by making a small remark. Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Yeah. So, gracias. Ya no necesito la presentación. So these two early translators of Kabir did not have access to the original due to linguistic constraints. They did not know Hindi. But these early translations of Spanish prepared the ground for an important work which was undertaken later in Argentina by the Grupo Sur, which was headed by Victoria Ocampo, with whom Tagore would have an enduring friendship. And that connection, of course, has been very well studied by many scholars, particularly by Ketki Kusari Tyson, the relationship between Victoria Ocampo and Tagore, and the role of the Revista Sur. So it is in these early 20th century exchanges, I think, such as the one that I have presented and such as the one which is represented by the Grupo Sur, that the Latin American intellectuals engaged with a non-Western cultures, engaged with India through a gaze that was not mediated by Europe. And Kabir's translations are a part of those silenced knowledges that need to be recovered to consolidate the imaginary of the global South and to elaborate a Southern epistemology that will enable a truly pluriversal world. Thank you so much for having given me this time. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchas gracias, señora Sonia. Ahora, bueno, le cedo la palabra, bueno, a la coordinadora de la Cátedra India, Agostina Cocó.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias a todos por estar hoy aquí. Para nosotros realmente es un orgullo y es un esfuerzo grande el que hacemos a diario. Realmente felicitar y agradecer al equipo principalmente y a todos los que forman y son parte de la Cátedra de la India y del Instituto de Relaciones Internacionales. Thank you very much for your excellent presentations. I would like to thank you very much for participating in the 10th edition of the Congress of the Institute of International Relations, which, as we said at the beginning, celebrates his 3rd anniversary. It is the only specific Congress of International Relations in Argentina and one of the few in South America. And this kind of presentations are not very we not very often to see Sonia Gupta, Rashid Pakanati, Priti Singh, Jasbel Singh, bueno, Lía de la Vega, que hoy no pudo estar, pero siempre nos acompaña en todo lo que emprendemos. Realmente, como decíamos hace un minuto, muchísimas gracias a todos por estar. En breve quería también hacer un saludo el director del Instituto de Relaciones Internacionales, Norberto Consani. Norberto Consani wants to say to close the table of India in this Congress. He's there, I think. So Norberto, if you could close the table, welcome.
I'm very happy to receive you, my friend from India, Pakanati. How are you, Pakanati? It's very happy to see you again. Sonia, ¿cómo va, Sonia? Yo sé que tú hablas español. ¿Cómo va, Sonia? Qué alegría de verte. It's very, y Priti Singh, you are Indian people. Very, very happy to see you. What other people here for India? Sonia, Singh also. Singh is from India. I don't know what other people from India. The ambassador. The ambassador is here also. Okay. Well, I'm very happy to receive you in the Congress. Very important. Excuse me, because I've met many meetings now in the beginning of the Congress, but I am very happy to receive you. Special Agostina is our team. Agostina y Ezequiel, they are very, very good people. Oh, I hope for the next year with Sonia, with Pakanati, we made a lecture in the PhD the next year. We prepared or organized with Agostina for the next year. It's very interesting. You remember your conversation, your meeting with you, Pakanati. Very, very, very happy the student with you. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. Your lecture 2 months ago. For me, very happy to see you, Sonia. What happened to you, Sonia?
See, I'm also very happy to see you, Norberto.
We speak in Spanish, Sonia.
Sí, qué gusto verte, Norberto, después de tantos años. Muy privilegiada de poder participar en este congreso. Gracias.
No, la alegría de verte y no te pierdas. Vamos a organizar algo con Agostina. Con Agostina. I hope to see you again. Goodbye. Bye.
Bueno, dado por una cuestión de tiempo, vamos a dar por terminada la sesión. Una pregunta nos la pueden acercar al mail institucional de la de la cátedra India que se los haremos llegar a los expositores. Dicho eso, bueno, agradezco en representación del Departamento de Asia y el Pacífico, del Instituto de Relaciones Internacionales, agradezco su presencia y los invito a continuar viéndonos y acompañándonos en el Congreso de Relaciones Internacionales. Muchas gracias y que tengan un muy buen día.
Gracias. Gracias por acompañarme. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Agos. Gracias.
Gracias, Sonia.